What's up? Welcome in. Hoge and Jahns back with you as another week of the offseason rolls on, getting close to the owners' meetings next week in Florida. What's going on, Johnsy?
It's nice and quiet, at least for the Chicago Bears at this point in the offseason. It's the time where you try to step away, relax, and take a bigger look at things.
Yeah, it definitely feels more like an actual offseason this year. We had that little rush of free agency, but it calmed down very quickly. Just minor signings from this point on, and that seems way different, especially from how it was last year with the whole Justin Fields, Caleb Williams debate that turned out to not really be a debate, but it was still created a lot of hoopla. So welcome in. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at Adam Hoge, at Adam Jahns. And of course, you can find our show accounts at Hoge and Jahns on Twitter. We're on Instagram as well now. Make sure you hit up that Instagram page for more content, more video there as always. Got a fun show planned for you today. We're going to check in with some division rivals with some guests that frequently on this show when we talk Vikings and when we talk Packers. We'll bring in Alec Lewis, who covers the Vikings for The Athletic, and Matt Schneidman, of course, covers the Packers. You've heard them on the show before. Been an interesting offseason, kind of a, typical offseason. The Vikings making some moves. The Packers, not really. They just made a couple minor moves. They're not going crazy in free agency. That's kind of their MO, but we'll check in with both franchises as we get into this, Jahns.
I feel like the Vikings have been in the news a bit. The Aaron Rodgers saga, or the flirtations of Aaron Rodgers and the Vikings didn't seem to get close. We'll ask Alec about that. I think Aaron Rodgers has only visited with the Steelers at this point, but that would have been a major story, the return of Aaron Rodgers to the NFC North, if it happened.
Yeah, that never made sense to me, so we definitely got to talk to him about that and why there were even flirtations to begin with. But yeah, now it seems like it's narrowing in on the Steelers, although a deal's not done. And once again, we're somehow all on Aaron Rodgers' timeline. Funny how he manages to do that.
Do you think Mike Tomlin is annoyed at this point that Aaron Rodgers came into the Steelers' offices during March Madness weekend, spent 6 hours there, and then left without a deal being done?
Maybe. I imagine that'll be among the storylines next week in Florida at the owners' meetings if something's not hammered out by then. The timeline's always interesting. I mean, maybe it's mutual. Maybe the Steelers want to see the draft go by. Maybe Aaron Rodgers wants to see the draft go by before making a decision. But they seem stuck because it's not like the Steelers have.
There's not a lot of teams with, yes, everyone's searching for their next quarterback. There's a lot of teams searching for their next quarterback, right? You got to get the quarterback position right, but a lot of teams have committed to quarterbacks, young and old, across the league at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a weird situation. And it was in Minnesota too, which is why we're going to bring in Alec Lewis here to talk about why there were even flirtations and, of course, some of the moves, because there were parallel positions, let's put it that way, that were addressed by both the Bears and the Vikings in free agency. The Vikings ended up with some guys. The Bears ended up with some guys with very similar spots, interior, offensive, and defensive line moves that were made. So let's bring in Alec and break all of that down. All right, you should be following and reading Alec Lewis, of course, covering the Vikings. Always does such a great job. Always enjoy having him on the show here. And it's been an interesting offseason for the Vikings. We can get into some of the free agent signings and things like that. But I think we're all trying to figure out the Aaron Rodgers flirtation and why it even happened, because it just seems like this should be J.J. McCarthy's show with Sam Darnold, Daniel Jones moving on, and yet there still seems to be like a sliver of doubt to that, even though, I mean, it seems like it should be his job, right?
Well, thanks for having me. First of all, yeah, it has been a fascinating 2 weeks. Fascinating is like the most positive word I could probably use.
Welcome to the Aaron Rodgers world, man.
Yeah. But what I would say is, I mean, for multiple years now, Kevin O'Connell the Vikings head coach, obviously, and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the GM. And they got here in 2022, and they had an idea at that point to and a want to build around a rookie quarterback contract. And that's where, once they moved off of Kirk Cousins last year, the spring of 2024, Kevin O'Connell structured plans to draft a guy, and it ended up being J.J. McCarthy. And I'd say the spring last year did not go phenomenally, but then the fall, he looked really good. In the preseason game against the Raiders, he looked very impressive, and they were planning to give him more first-team reps, in Cleveland in joint practices, and then he suffered his torn meniscus. And so you have a guy now, a year later, who has not played a snap in a real NFL football game, and you have a roster that is very, it's well built, especially after this free agency period. They shored up some of the interior of their offensive line. They added Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen in the interior defensive line. Their running back room is deeper with Jordan Mason. This roster is a pretty impressive group, and so it leads you down a lot of paths. The preferred option internally was to bring back Daniel Jones to pair him with J.J. McCarthy, so that in the event there was a setback or J.J. McCarthy did not secure the starting job, you would have a guy that had familiarity with the scheme after coming in last year and that could play. And then Daniel Jones chooses Indianapolis. So the team found itself in a spot where, okay, what are our options here? Well, we could probably add a Jameis Winston, Joe Flacco type. Or if Aaron Rodgers wants to come here and Kevin O'Connell has had a 15-year relationship with him, and there are people internally who think that option makes sense and he'd be willing to do it at a very low cost, maybe we should think about this. And so that was kind of the machinations of the last couple weeks. And really, I wanted to give you the history because I think it's relevant. You have a team that is a really impressive roster on paper with a lot of questions from a durability standpoint. And you have a quarterback coming off a serious injury who's never played a snap in an NFL game. And those two things are hard to jive. You're balancing short-term wants, long-term development. And so it's been an interesting conversation. Again, fascinating, interesting, are very positive spins on it from me. So that's what I'd say.
So J.J. McCarthy, I think, was on Kay Adams' show, her podcast this morning, basically saying, and I'm paraphrasing a lot here, that I haven't heard from the team. I don't know if I'm the starter. Haven't been told I'm the starter. Haven't been told I'm the number one. You hear that this morning. What do you make of it after everything you just said with the Aaron Rodgers saga?
Yeah, I don't know how it benefits anybody really, other than just like being comfortable to name a guy who has never played an NFL snap to name him a starter for a team, again, that has the expectations that they do. So I mean, Kevin O'Connell was asked in January whether JJ was the starter, and he didn't answer that question directly because I think you want to see how does he progress in the spring and summer. He definitely did lose a lot of weight throughout the course of the rehab. And while, you guys saw the interview with Kay Adams or clips of it, it looks like he's put on a lot of the weight back on. I heard at the combine he was back over 200 pounds, but you still have to see on the field, how does he look? Can he sustain it? Again, he played one preseason game and a season-ending injury occurred. So I just think this team wants to see him have a very good spring and summer before just handing him a job, the biggest job for a roster that is very competitive, like I've said multiple times already, and probably sound like a broken record. And it's also a roster with guys like Justin Jefferson and Harrison Smith. These guys really want to win. Harrison Smith doesn't come back if he doesn't want to win. Justin Jefferson, this guy's focus and main priority is winning. And so I also don't know how it benefits just from a locker room standpoint to just hand the guy a job. I do think he's going to have to go out there and prove it every single day this spring and summer with what he does on the field, with how he, operates internally. For me, when the conversation of bringing back Daniel Jones happened, I remember talking to somebody internally and they're like, does healthy quarterback development mean no competition at all? I thought that was a very interesting point. to have a guy prove it is probably optimal if you're developing the way they want to develop a quarterback.
Alec, scale 1 to 10, 1 being not an issue at all, 10 being very concerning. What's the level of concern on him coming back from that knee injury or any lingering effects from that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would go lower than 5. So maybe like 3, 4 from a physical standpoint of recovering from a torn meniscus. I mean, guys have done it. Like, guys have come back from a torn meniscus. We're not operating in the 1980s, and there's nothing against the 1980s and medical availability at that time. But I don't know if the concerns at all are the recovery physically. If he is physically capable when he is on the field, he can be very impressive. Again, we saw that last fall. You saw that at Michigan on some of those important third downs late in the season of that national championship winning season. But I think it's all of the other stuff. It is, can you assert yourself as the leader of a very competitive team? And that takes a level of professionalism every day that you just haven't had the opportunity really to display because he just hasn't been available for any period of time. So for me, physically, as long as the weight is there and he can maintain that, I don't think the concern is very high.
Alec, let me read some of these Vikings moves because they've spent a lot of money this offseason. You've been busy. Defensive tackle Jonathan Allen, free agent, 3 years, $51 million. Guard Will Fries, free agent, 5 years, $88 million. Defensive tackle Javon Hargrave, 2 years, $30 million. Running back Aaron Jones re-signed, 2 years, $20 million. Let's look at a couple of these more. Center Ryan Kelly, free agent, 2 years, $18 million. Cornerback Byron Murphy re-signed, 3 years, $54 million. Safety Harrison Smith re-signed, 1 year, $10.25 million. And then what else we got here? We got a punter. We could skip him, but wow,
why are we skipping the punter?
He's no Tory Taylor.
Fine, you want him? Punter Ryan Wright re-signed, 1 year, $1.75 million.
He deserves some respect too. That's all I'm saying.
There you go. He's included. Wow, busy year for the Vikings. Win now mode. That's how I'm interpreting this. What do the Vikings want? What do they expect out of all these moves, especially with the investment up front?
Well, we haven't gotten to talk to an executive or a coach since they made all of these signings publicly, which has been interesting. That's certainly been fascinating. When you spend $250 million and don't talk about it, I don't know about all that, but I don't know if you guys know, there's been some conversation about the quarterback in the last couple of weeks that has maybe been led the team down the path of not wanting to talk about it. We will talk to Kwesi Adofo-Mensah on Wednesday, but I am curious, what is the expectation? Because they have taken a pretty long-term view from the time they took over. It wasn't this full-on rebuild. It was the way they termed it, and it's kind of become the butt of a joke here. It's like this competitive rebuild because, okay, are you being competitive? Are you rebuilding? Are you doing it? It's been an interesting ride, but I think there's no question when you spend that much money and you have done to this roster what they've done to it, enhancing the interiors on both sides. Again, fortifying the running back room with Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason, bring back Byron Murphy Jr. on the deal that they brought him back, Isaiah Rodgers at cornerback. I mean, they have really spent and rounded the roster to a point at which I feel like the expectation is going to be playoffs at minimum, and then you see where things go from there. Especially if it is a quarterback playing for the first time. And that throws an interesting wrench in it. But I give them credit because not only did they spend for all of these players, but it was a very strategic operation. They also wanted to secure comp picks through this free agency period. So not only did they spend as much as they did, but a lot of their spending was also on players who had been released, to where you can spend that money, but also get what they're projected to potentially get a 3rd round comp pick and a 4th round comp pick for 2026, which again is kind of balancing the short and long-term objectives. And I mean, this draft, the other aspect of the spending is this draft, they only have 4 picks right now. and it's a first rounder, a third rounder, a fifth rounder, and I believe a sixth rounder. So they had to shore up some of their holes through free agency. Now, if you look at like NFC North odds, you'll see that the Lions obviously are favored, then the Packers, and then the Bears and the Vikings. And people here locally are like, why would the Vikings be last in the NFC North with this roster that we have? Well, one of the answers is obviously quarterback, but the other answer is, I mean, there are durability questions with almost every signing they made and a lot of players on the roster. And I could run this down, but I mean, almost at every position, you have guys who have been hurt in recent memory or are kind of aging, getting to that 30-year-old threshold that gives you some pause. So I think, I mean, this Viking season, regardless of expectations, it is going to hinge on quarterback play, obviously. Thank you, Captain Obvious, Alec Lewis, beat writer of The Athletic, most obvious statement ever made. But it's also going to be just integral that they stay healthy the way they did last year. And if they can do that, they'll probably, over exceed the projections the way they did last year as well.
Personally, I thought it was a no-brainer to let Sam Darnold walk for the contract that he got. And I honestly would have said that even if he had finished strong in those last two games that he didn't. But that being said, the way it did end in those last two games, I mean, do you think there was any world that Sam Darnold would have returned to the Vikings, or was that just, the exact, as much as they didn't want to have that outcome, exactly what they needed to see to make that decision for them?
I mean, the world would be hard to create where he comes back and it makes sense when you have JJ McCarthy, who you invested in with the number 10 pick, and who, I mean, and you guys know this because you've watched the way fans feel about young quarterbacks there time and time again, but the fan base in Minnesota is chomping at the bit for a young quarterback to become the guy. I mean, this is a team that has had guys obviously in the past. I mean, Kirk Cousins was, I mean, I know you guys have litigated the Kirk Cousins and what he was. We go back to Dante Culpepper and we could go back, but like this fan base is, the passion is fervent for this guy who they invested in, who Kevin O'Connell invested in and handpicked with the number 10 pick, for him to become the guy. So if Sam comes back, that would have probably in some ways, in the fans' eyes specifically, impeded the path to getting to JJ McCarthy. And then if Sam were to have struggled in a game the way he did down the stretch, I mean, it would have been loud for JJ McCarthy to get his opportunity. So from Sam's perspective, I always thought that was going to be difficult for him to come back with JJ and the feeling around here being what it was. But there's no question that the last two games and the way it ended last year definitely, I think in some ways it did help the transition to getting to where they are now. But they're still in a spot. I mean, as we're talking right now, the quarterback room is JJ McCarthy, guy who suffered a torn meniscus, has never played an NFL game, and a guy you guys know well, Brett Rypien. That's it. That's their quarterback room. So they still haven't added your Joe Flacco, your Ryan Tannehill, your Drew Locks of the world, MIZ for the Mizzou folks listening. They still haven't done that. And so it's still, the quarterback room still remains in an interesting spot.
So here in Chicago, everybody loves the Bears moves up front, like trading for Joe Thuney, trading for Jonah Jackson. Will Fries, he was on all our lists as a potential target for the Bears. Obviously didn't become the number one option. Like, how was that move viewed in Minnesota? 5 games last year, and now he has a 5-year contract, nearly $80 million, like $90 million, I should say. Like, what do you make of it? What does everyone there think of it?
Well, people are pumped because the interior of the offensive line here has been, I mean, similarly, it's been a struggle. Like, I think it's been easy nationally for people to overlook the Vikings offensive line, partly because Christian Darrisaw on the left side has been so good since they drafted him. And then on the right side, Brian O'Neill has been very steady at right tackle. But the interior, I mean, they just really have, since I started covering the team in 2022, it's just been musical chairs of guys that you just can't feel that confident about. It's been your Dalton Reisners, your Ezra Clevelands, Garrett Bradbury. It's just been a rotating cast of guys who are not, real solid pass protectors who do not move guys in the run game. And so for the Vikings to finally spend on a right guard like Will Fries, who can be that guy, especially alongside a former teammate of his in Ryan Kelly at center, people are pumped about it. But again, this is where I think it's important in my role to caution. I mean, Will Fries is coming off a broken tibia. He is an interior offensive lineman. I don't know if you guys know or think this, but I imagine the lower body for a guy who's anchoring against 300-pounders is probably important. So his recovery and his ability to stay healthy is critical, just like Ryan Kelly at center. I mean, Ryan Kelly is, a highly respected guy across the league, has done it at a high level for a very long time at center, but he's navigated a ton of injuries, knee stuff, hip stuff. So I think people here are pumped that there is, hope that the interior of the offensive line is going to be what it has not been for a long time. But there is caution because you're buying in this market of guys that do have. It's not just rosy. It's not just perfect. It's not your first round pick that you have no worries about. So I think that's kind of the feel here from people who have thought about it pretty deeply.
Just to wrap this up, Alec, I think like based on what I'm hearing from you, it sounds like the Vikings might be the most volatile team in the division this coming season. If the quarterback hits, if the team stays healthy, if these signings stay healthy, they can win the division. If McCarthy struggles and these injury concerns you're talking about, these durability concerns you're talking about, end up stacking up, similar to what the Lions dealt with last year, they might not even come close to making the playoffs. I mean, is that fair to say?
Yeah, I do think that's fair. I think there's volatility with every team. It's like in Detroit, you have new coordinators. What is that going to mean for the Lions? Green Bay, I just feel like Jordan Love is a volatile guy. Like sometimes I think this guy's unbelievable, and sometimes I'm like, why are you throwing that? And then Chicago, you guys, I don't know. I'm not going to speak to Chicago because
it's their existence.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. But yeah, I think you're definitely on it. Because again, if Kevin O'Connell, who has had as much success as he has working with quarterbacks, can get JJ McCarthy to play at a certain level, and if the Vikings can have the type of injury, you call it luck, but let's just say injury luck they've had in recent years. I think this is a team that Vikings fans will enjoy watching every Sunday. You think about, really for me, you start to have a lot of fun thinking about what the defense and Brian Flores can do now that he has a defensive front of Jonathan Grenard, Javon Hargrave, Jonathan Allen, Andrew Van Ginkel, potentially Dallas Turner, and then you got pass rushers from the second level. I know Brian Flores is sitting on the third floor of the TCO Performance Center in Eagan, just having a lot of fun thinking about what's possible. And this has already been a defense that has been as good as it's been under him. So there are a lot of ways, to your point, where you can see this going a very positive, fun, enjoyable way, the way that last year in 2022 went.
Alec Lewis, man, appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Always fun.
Alec.
All right, well, let's go from Minnesota over to Wisconsin and bring in our guy, Matt Schneidman, of course, covers the Packers for The Athletic. Very different offseason, it seems like, for the Packers compared to everything we just talked about with the Vikings. It's, Matt, we used to have you on to talk about Aaron Rodgers. Now we have Alec come on to talk about Aaron Rodgers. It's very weird. Can't keep, it's just getting very confusing in this division.
Yeah, I'm obviously paying attention to the Aaron Rodgers stuff because assuming he plays next season, he's going to face the Packers for the first time because they play the Giants, they play the Steelers, they obviously play the Vikings. I love covering Aaron. Anyone who says, oh, all the drama, like Aaron Rodgers pays the bills. He's a great interview. I got along well with him. But there is something nice about just being able to sit and watch and not, having to have your phone on loud vibrate every single day just in case something happens. And people like, Giants beat writers, my guy Dan Dugan, and I see other people on Twitter being like, will he just make a decision? Brother, 2 years ago, they didn't trade him until draft night. You got a whole nother month to go.
Where do you think he ends up? Like, what city do you think he wants to join?
It's got to be the Steelers, right? I mean, maybe I was a little wrong in saying all along that he would never join the Vikings because, when he goes on McAfee, he still refers to the Packers as we. I'm not sure he would want to exactly replicate what Brett Favre did after he left the Packers, going from the Jets to the Vikings. But look, Aaron said to us a couple of years ago here in Green Bay, regarding the end of his career, that he didn't want to go out like a bum. Right now, he's going out like a bum. So I think he wants to play for the team that gives him the best chance to kind of rewrite the narrative for the end of his career. The Vikings are the unquestioned answer to that. They're the best team out of the three. So I think that would be a reason to entice him there. But, it seems like they're set on McCarthy, and, it's pretty obvious between the Steelers and Giants who's the better team. So it would be funny. That's the team Aaron beat in his lone Super Bowl appearance. So I think we'll be going to Pittsburgh probably week 1, Sunday Night Football.
That would make sense. And by the way, I don't know that we've mentioned this on this show, but both the Steelers and the Giants come to Soldier Field this year. So good chance that at some point in the season, Aaron Rodgers will return to the stadium that he technically owns, or at least declared that he owns. So
until they move to Arlington Heights, then I think it belongs to the cast.
Well, if he's still playing by the time they're in Arlington Heights, then I think we're already sick of him. But now, like, that would just be crazy. All right, well, Matt, let's talk about the Packers because we just got done talking to Alec, and it's been they've spent a ton of money in Minnesota. Their quarterback situation seems like it should be resolved, but they clearly need to add there at least some competition. In Green Bay, it's very different. I mean, obviously Jordan loves the guy, and this has seemed like more of a stereotypical Green Bay offseason where a couple additions here and there, but they're not going crazy in free agency. Has anything that they've done surprised you at all?
A little bit, just because when Brian Gutekunst met with us during his season-ending press conference the week after the season ended, he said 3 things that made me think they would make bigger splashes, if you will, in free agency. He said, I think it's time we start competing for championships. Those were his exact words. He said, we are in the best situation with cap space we've been in 2 or 3 years. And then he also said, there needs to be more urgency from the organization all across it. So to me, that said, okay, we're going into year 3 of the Jordan Love era. We've made the playoffs as the 2 youngest teams ever to make the playoffs are the 2023 Packers and the 2024 Packers. So to me, that said, okay, now it's time to start competing and not just go on these feel-good runs. We got to actually win something now. So I said, okay, they got a lot of cap space. They're going to make some splashes. And they didn't just sit pat. They made some signings. Aaron Banks, the left guard from the 49ers. Elton Jenkins, the 2-time Pro Bowl left guard for the Packers, is probably going to move to center, where he has backed up in recent years. And then Nate Hobbs, the nickel from the Raiders, who right now looks like he's going to play outside. Jaire Alexander is still on the roster, but I don't expect that to stay that way. They gave him $16 million guaranteed. Aaron Banks, 4 years, $77 million, I believe. They re-signed a couple of their own guys, Isaiah McDuffie, their third linebacker, Brandon McManus, their kicker. But other than that, it's been a pretty modest offseason for the Packers. Some of that is probably because this wasn't the greatest free agency class. So what would you rather your team do? Just spend money because you have it on players who don't deserve it? Or, maybe be more calculated in some signings? And then obviously Packer fans wanted them to trade for Myles Garrett, Max Crosby, Trey Hendrickson, sign Devontae Adams, trade for T. Higgins, all that stuff. None of that happened. I'm not sure how realistic any of it ever was. DK Metcalf, another one. So all in all, I would say a pretty modest approach for the Packers this offseason. They have a couple new position coaches, I think, which is going to be important on the D-line, at quarterback coach. But other than hoping for internal improvements from guys that are entering their second year or third year, like a Lucas Van Ness, that's where the biggest changes are going to come with this team, not from any outside signings like last year when they got Josh Jacobs and Xavier McKinney.
Can I follow up on what you said about Alexander? Admittedly, we're not following it as closely
Mhm.
as you are as you are up there. He's a player that Bears fans know well. So what's going on? Why don't you expect him to be on the roster in 2025?
Yeah, so he just turned 28. That doesn't really have anything to do with it, but they had a decision to make with him and still do this offseason because he has played in only 7 games in each of the last 2 seasons because of 4 different injuries. He missed 13 games in 2021. So in the last 3 of the last 4 seasons, he's played 4 regular season games, 7 regular season games, 7 regular season games due to injury, and then 1 game suspension for that coin toss incident. Anytime you are paying a player that much, he signed a contract extension in 2022 to make him, at the time, the highest paid corner in history, $21 million a year. And he has the 3rd highest cap hit on the team behind Jordan Love and Rashawn Gary right now. Anytime you're paying a player that much and he's playing so little, you got to wonder when you have to cut your losses. Now, when he's on the field, when he's elite, or I should say he is elite, even at 28 years old, he's still in his prime, you could say. He's probably not as good of a tackler as he once was, but he's still a really good cover guy. I have talked to people on both sides of this whole thing, the Packers and then on Jaire's side. Everything I've heard is that he is not going to be on the Packers next season. That's not necessarily a definitive it's done, but it certainly looks like it's looking that way. 2 seasons ago, there was stuff off the field that was really frustrating the Packers. It was a lead up to that coin toss incident that they suspended him. Matt LaFleur said it wasn't just that singular incident. There was stuff behind the scenes leading up to that kind of, made the coin toss incident the last straw. This season, I'm not sure there has been as much off the field stuff that has led to this maybe hesitancy to bring him back. I just think at the end of the day, the crux of this is you're paying the guy a lot of money. He's not on the field nearly enough. And at that point, you have to wonder, is it worth paying him what we're paying him if he's not going to be available? It came out during the combine that the Packers were open to trading him. They haven't traded him yet. So it might be a situation of Brian Gutekunst is just biding his time until the draft, waiting to see if there's going to be a team that gives in and gives them a late round pick for Alexander so they don't have to compete for him on the open market. But from everything I've heard, they're going to release him if he's not traded. I don't believe that's a final decision yet, but it certainly looks headed that way. Is there a chance he's still on the team? Sure, there's a chance, but I would be surprised if that's the case. And then, the Packers had Eric Stokes, Corey Ballantyne, Robert Rochelle, 3 of their depth cornerbacks sign elsewhere in free agency. They just have pretty much 3 cornerbacks who have any semblance of NFL experience on their roster. So that's a position they'd have to address in the draft because they really have no depth there.
Matt, I thought Jordan Love was good, not great last year. I think we'd all agree it was at least a little bit of a small step back for him. What do you think the confidence level is? I mean, he's locked in contractually. He's not going anywhere.
Right.
But what do you think the confidence level is in Jordan Love to kind of settle in as better than he was last season?
Yeah, I think something I said, and I know a lot of other people said it after that 2023 season when he played like an MVP level quarterback the second half of the season. There was an 8-game stretch where he had 18 touchdown passes, 1 interception. Then if you count the first round of the playoffs against the Cowboys, 21 touchdowns to 1 interception in that 9-game span. It was unrealistic to think he could continue that into his second season. It was probably a little bit more of a dip than we anticipated, in part due to injury. He sprains his MCL the first game of the season in Brazil. Then he sprains his groin a couple games after he returns. So it wasn't until after the midway point of the season, their week 10 bye week, where he was able to get in a consistent routine of practicing in full, playing. But even then, it wasn't like the league on fire. When I sat down with Matt LaFleur for the podcast we do, he said late in the season that Jordan Love was playing the best football of his career now that he was healthy, and that included the 2023 season. So maybe it was just getting healthy and getting those routine practice reps, but still he stumbled to end the season. against the Bears to end the season, he wasn't great. Granted, they sat Josh Jacobs. They I think sat Love for a portion of that game, if I remember correctly. Then against the Eagles, he wasn't great either. So Jordan Love has to be better with his footwork. That's one thing that LaFleur mentioned, how it got sloppy. He's got to be better with his footwork. I think he has to do a better job of not staring down receivers. There were a couple times throughout the season in the playoffs against Zach Bond included, where he just throws it right to a linebacker. Like he doesn't even see him there. And I think sometimes other players are able to read where he's going with the ball too easily. And then we'll see if a new position coach makes a difference. I mean, Tom Clements has coached Favre, Rodgers, and Love. He retired. Sean Mannion, who chose to coach the Packers over the Bears, is now the QB coach. Reportedly, they still have not announced their coaching staff.
I was going to say, I was just looking at their coaching staff online. I'm like, there is no quarterbacks coach right now.
No, they still have not announced the new coaching staff, which is crazy. But yeah, I think Jordan needs to get back to that level because it's loud online around him right now. Obviously not entirely justified. I still think he's a definite top 12 quarterback in this league, and half the league would kill to have a guy like him with a great chance to get back into the top 10 this year. But he's got to fix that footwork, fix his eyes, kind of look ahead of receivers instead of looking right at them. And then I think we can get back into the discussion of, okay, you can win because of this guy, not just win with him, which I think was the case at some points last season when the Packers were a lot more of a run-heavy team than we'd seen with LaFleur as their head coach.
Matt, when it comes to the draft, what do the Packers need? What do fans want? What do you think that they should do? I think our last mock draft, you took a receiver, so maybe take us through their draft prospects here a little bit.
Yeah, it's interesting because they don't have as many picks as they've had in years past. So I think they had like 13 and 11 the last 2 years. So Brian Gutekunst was asked at the Combine about that, and he said, well, we don't have as many picks yet. They have 8 right now, and the draft is in Green Bay this year. So he was asked, how do you think fans would react if you traded out of the first round just to accumulate more picks? And he said, well, I'm not the one on that stage announcing that news. So we'll see if they pick at number 23. I will say the last time they picked number 23, so there's a little symmetry here. In 2010, they were coming off a season in which they won 11 games. It was entering Aaron Rodgers' third season starting. They picked number 23 in the draft. They won the Super Bowl the next season. Now they're entering Jordan Love's third season starting. They just won 11 games. They're picking number 23 in the draft. So Packers are winning the Super Bowl next year. But I think their top needs in the draft are definitely wide receiver. Christian Watson tore his ACL against the Bears, so he's going to miss at least the first half of the season. They need a pass rusher on the defensive line, can be interior or on the edge. They just didn't get enough consistent pressure rushing 4 traditionally. They had to use a lot of kind of exotic pressures bringing 4. And then corner, I think, whether it's a starter or a depth guy. I will say, the big narrative, it's not a narrative, it's a fact, is that the Packers haven't drafted a receiver in the first round since 2002. The only offensive skill position players they've taken since then are Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love in the first round. So this could be the year they break that streak. I find it interesting. Jordan Reed from ESPN reported that Brian Gutekunst was the only general manager at Teteroa McMillan's private workout in, I believe, Scottsdale last week. So could that be a trade-up target where they go and get the second best receiver in the draft behind Travis Hunter? We'll see. I'll believe it when I see it, but I think wide receiver, pass rusher, and corner are their definitive top 3 needs going into this draft.
Matt, appreciate the insight as always. This is going to be an interesting division this year, which is why we wanted to get you and Alec on the show today. So we'll continue to follow it, and hopefully the weather's nice in Green Bay draft weekend.
It might be snowing. It was dumping snow yesterday. So I think there's at least a chance of it just snowing throughout the first round, which I think the TV networks would enjoy.
Yeah, it'd be fitting in a way.
Yeah, might as well lean into it, I guess. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Matt.
All right, there is Matt Schneidman. Good stuff from both Alec Lewis and Matt Schneidman. I feel like we've done a decent job of talking about the Lions throughout all this too. So we wanted to focus on those 2 teams today. But Jahns, any takeaways before we get out of here?
The division, I don't feel like the Bears are that far off. I really don't. I think I say this every year, but we see teams make jumps when things click for various reasons, like 2018. Matt Nagy and Mr. Trubisky actually worked, and that defense was outstanding. We'll see what this team, the Bears, happen to be with all the moves that have happened this year. But to your point about the Vikings earlier, there seems to be a lot of change afoot within this division.
I think it's up for grabs right now as we sit here in March. And there's obviously, let's see the draft. What Matt was talking about. Let's see if they get, a dynamic receiver in Green Bay or, a better pass rush situation. Technically Trey Hendrickson's still floating out there, so there's still a lot that could change, but yeah, I mean, I think there's still this assumption that the Lions are on top. They probably should be on paper, but I also think that with the amount of change that they had from their coaching staff, I think it's naive to think that Jared Goff's going to be the same quarterback he's been the last few years without Ben Johnson. So what type of drop-off is there on that? Now they also get Aiden Hutchinson back. They also will be healthy again, at least to start the year. So I can see that both ways. But to me, really seems like it's up for grabs. Seems like it's one of the more fun divisions in football, if not the most fun. And when you throw in, the Aaron Rodgers wrinkle, he could be doing a tour of the NFC North himself, playing for the Steelers. Be a lot of fun matchups in here as well, as always.
Yeah. It wasn't too long ago where the NFC North was considered like one of the worst divisions in football. Teams like the Bears seem to make that happen. The Lions, they were a bottom dweller for years. So it's good to see the competition level increase and have actual Super Bowl contenders to watch, during the season twice a year.
Well, we got to get out of here. Make sure you are following us at Adam Hoge, at Adam Jahns, at Hoge and Jahns on Twitter and on Instagram now. Make sure you find us on Instagram. Give that account a follow with more video as well. HoganJahns.com is where you can get all of our merch. Greatly appreciate everybody watching, listening. Hit that like button. Please subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. And, of course, listen wherever you can as a podcast, wherever you listen to your podcast, Spotify, Apple, wherever that is. Please rate and review the pod. We appreciate it as always. Thanks for watching, listening today. We'll be back later on in the week.
See ya.